complete accounting of every single detail. The fundamental details, however, are the basis of the probable cause for which we're using to place these charges this evening.
Can you speak to that? Can you speak specifically how you came about?
Is that we have now funded for our entire Bureau of Patrol. So every officer in the Bureau of Patrol will have those body cameras, so they will be fully rolled out, and they have been accounted for in this year's budget. And so we will have our body camera program, which we started implementing even before this year. So to be clear, he was not issued. He did not have a body camera on during this incident.
State's Attorney Greg Mortimer, Chief. Maryland has the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which may or may not complicate this investigation. I'm not sure, which is why I'm asking. Could you reflect on that for us, please?
Well, if you'll allow me to indulge, the State's Attorney is in a position where she will now be fundamental to how this proceeds. So I would like to answer that question. And the legal analysis that I've received, again, as part of this extensive review over the last almost 24 hours, is that LEOBR does not attach under the circumstances that are before us. This is an unprecedented set of circumstances in the experience of this institution, and in my view, it necessitated unprecedented action. But the legal analysis I have is that we are not contravening LEOBR in taking these actions, and my belief for our community is that this is the only appropriate course of action under these circumstances.
For instance, the bill does not allow, I think, investigators to talk to the officer for at least 7 days. I'm not positive about that, but have you been able to interview or speak with this officer?
So again, I won't get into the details of that. I am confident that we have established probable cause to place these charges. We're not going to contravene anyone's rights with respect to LEOBR, but LEOBR does not attach under the circumstances which, again, are unprecedented and which we face this evening.
Can you tell us a little bit more? How long has the officer been on the force? Can you tell us a little bit more about him?
Corporal Owen is a 10-year veteran of the Prince George's County Police Department. There's additional information we'll be providing to you through our Media Relations Division. But beyond that, we have to be circumspect because, again, we have to respect the work that the State's Attorney will be doing in the coming days with respect to that officer and the fuller context of this event.
Is there any evidence you can reveal that might be in the charging documents? For instance, how many shots may have been fired, et cetera?
I will say that we believe 7 shots were fired, and I believe that's reflected in the statement of probable cause. And I want to be clear with my community, that's part of what's led us to this decision. But beyond that, I'm going to refer you back to that statement of probable cause so that we don't interfere with what will be the process of presenting this to the grand jury. Again, we're going to provide you with as much information as the law in the state of Maryland and our perspective on transparency will allow you to have. You know that. I give you my assurance on that. We are working to provide that to you, but I'm not going to make comments from this podium on that topic. I'm going to provide you that information through MRD so that we do not violate the officer's rights, and we certainly don't want to contravene Maryland law in this matter.
Paul. Chief, based on a timeline that we've been able to establish with some videos that we have, it appears as if Mr. Green stopped on that street at around 7:24 or so. And we hear the officer call for a departmental shooting at approximately 7:58, 7:59. What happened in all that time? What was going on?
Preliminarily, there were concerns raised by the two responding officers with respect to Mr. Green's level of impairment by unknown substances. And they were attempting to secure additional support from a drug recognition expert in order to address that. In that intervening time, these events occurred. That's where we are, and that's as much detail as I'm able to provide you, again, in the context of prior questions about where we are and then in preparation for a grand jury presentation.
In the search of his vehicle, were you all able to find, and there was an early report about the smell of PCP, anything that linked to drug usage?
What we endeavor to do in Prince George's County, and as you know, is to provide facts when we have facts. Preliminarily, our media relations representatives last night spoke to the possibility of PCP being involved. That does not appear to be the case. Further, the account that we had last night that there were independent witnesses of a struggle inside that vehicle, that was not corroborated. That was not corroborated. And I'm not able to state to a certainty with respect to whether or not Mr. Green was seatbelted in that cruiser. Those are the three substantive changes that occurred as this investigation proceeded through the early morning hours and brought us, frankly, to this point. Those are the 3 points that I want to correct. Again, I hope that the community will offer me some latitude. We seek to provide information quickly and to be transparent. That was preliminary information, and as I've always promised the community, when I have facts, you'll have facts. So again, we do not believe PCP was involved. We do not have independent witnesses that observed a struggle, and we do not know for certainty that Mr. Green was seatbelted in that cruiser.
Can you tell us anything about any other officers who may have been on the scene, on or near the scene when this occurred, and whether or not they're witnesses in this case?
I cannot, again, out of respect for the grand jury process and obviously interviews that will need to proceed with our Special Investigations Response Team, as again, to be clear with the community, the investigation is not concluded because we have chosen to place charges based on probable cause, but those are components of the next phase. As was explained in a conversation we had earlier, there are two components, and we are being respectful of what follows with respect to the state's attorney's prosecution in this matter.
He was handcuffed behind his back.
He was handcuffed behind his back.
Madam Secretary, I guess I have a question. So we started with a punch, we got a 6-month sentence. Then we have DeMonte, who actually was paralyzed by the police. Now we have another handcuffed man that's shot 7 times. When are we going to do a bad police register and stop taking charges from the collusion of these policemen being bad cops? We need a bad cop register, because what they're doing is taking up for each other. The blue lives matter. So is it a possibility that we can get a list and stop taking charges and protecting these cops? Because now we started from punch, now we got a paralyzed man, now we got a man dead. We got a problem with PG County.
Whom are you addressing that question to?
She's the one who wants the charges. Stop taking charges from these cops, because eventually this cop lied. All the stories that came out in the beginning, and you guys stood by that cop. Y'all stood by the cop. I'm talking to Madam Secretary.
No, I understand, ma'am.
Madam State Attorney.
So if you have something you'd like to discuss further, we can do so after this press event. I understand, and that could be addressed after this media event. So with that, are there any more questions from members of the media?
So you disregard me?
I'm not disregarding you. No, please, let's have a discussion afterward.
And I have concerns of a cop.
Understood, ma'am. But ma'am, we may have a discussion afterwards about this. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
You know what, we appreciate your concern, and we share it. I understand the passion that you brought here tonight, and let me just say, and you know, we're upset too. That's the reason we're here tonight. But what we want to do is to conclude this conference, and I promise you that we will step aside and talk to you, but we share your concern. We understand that you're upset, and you're not alone. You are expressing the frustration of this community. We understand it. We get it. I promise you we will not minimize it. That's the reason we're here tonight, and we respect you for coming out to express it. If you just give us a chance to conclude here, I promise you that we will step aside. I know the state's attorney will be more than happy to discuss this with you.
All right, so if there are no other questions, okay.
In the history of the police department, has an officer ever been convicted of murder?
So
In the history of the PD?
So that's something that I'll be able to get you at a later date. So, Chief, you can speak to that.
I want to be clear. This is a difficult decision to arrive at. We have to respect due process. But in the early morning hours, I had grave concerns. And that's why, for the last almost 24 hours, I've been engaged with all the components that I enumerated earlier. And then ultimately, that decision was made earlier this afternoon. And we unfortunately had to set aside an earlier press appointment in order to conclude conversations with our partners on that. So in the early morning hours, I had grave concerns. And then early this afternoon, I arrived at that decision. And that's brought us to this point.
And Chief, can you just be clear, is he in custody now and will face a bond hearing tomorrow?
He is in custody now, and we are anticipating a bond hearing in the near future, yes.
Do you have any information that Mr. Green may have had some kind of a diabetic reaction if he didn't,
I'm not going to be able to make any comments with respect to that.
based on what we've heard about his erratic driving?
I don't have any insight into that question right now.
Something about the ACLU mentioned, and there have been conversations about people who are experiencing some kind of trauma, whether it be with drugs or some kind of medical emergency or mental illness, and the police department's response to that. We were talking about improving training. Will that be part of what you all are focusing on to look at what's going on with training people who are in traumatic situations or in distress?
I'm not certain what the ACLU's reference for that is. What I know is that we train our officers in crisis intervention, and last evening was an example where they were looking for a drug recognition expert to address concerns that they had. In other cases, we refer to our psychological services for people who are in crisis and experiencing emotional crisis. So there's a host of capacities that we have under those circumstances. But yes, as the county executive has made clear, and as we will continue to do, we are going to look at our methods and practices and look to generate additional capacity, because this is not acceptable. This is not where we want to be.
Speaking of practices, what goes behind having people in the front seat, front passengers? What goes behind?
Our perspective on that, and it goes back to the very founding of the institution, is that that police officer is in a better position to control someone or prevent injury to a person if they have access to them in the front seat of that car. If you place them in the back seat of that car, that person can potentially attack that officer. That person can move throughout the vehicle. If there's an accident, you're not able to throw your arm over there, and I've done that, try to prevent somebody from being injured in a collision or a sudden stop. And again, these practices go back to, and my experience with that, to be clear, goes back to before airbags. So it's so that that officer has the ability to control that individual should they choose to become disorderly during the process of arrest.
Chief, you did say that this officer has had some issues before. Can you speak to that at all? I understand.
Again, I've addressed that. Those are matters of public record, and we're working to pull the public record from those events of almost 10 years ago so that we're providing the same information we disclosed publicly at that point. But again, I want to be clear, our goal is transparency. Our goal is to provide facts to this community and to hold people accountable. And we also have an obligation not to contravene the law, and that's why that's going to take a moment, because again, I'm standing here in an unprecedented set of circumstances and providing this information not 24 hours into it. I'm only asking for a little patience while we do that, so again, we don't contravene the law.
And Chief, have you seen that cell phone video that's been shared publicly? Have you seen it?
I have seen stills from that video.
What do you think?
I don't have any conclusion based on the stills.
Okay, one more right here.
But you just mentioned unprecedented. I think you might have addressed this a little bit later, but when was the last time a Prince George's police officer was charged with murder? Can you recall that? Has this happened before? Is this rare? Can you speak to that?
Well, this has been a very challenging set of circumstances because there is a balancing act that's required, and that is our obligation under due process and our system of law. I feel that we have probable cause to place charges, and in my experience, this is unprecedented. And again, that's why I'm asking for patience as we provide you with as much information as we are able, because this isn't coming after 30 or 45 days of investigation. This is coming within 24 hours because I felt that was the appropriate remedy to these circumstances.
How do you contain the outrage in the community?
I ask this community for their patience and understanding. I've made it clear that, in my view, this constitutes a crime, and that individual will be held accountable for that crime in the same way that any other individual under law would be held accountable. There aren't two sets of rules, and there is no dynamic whereby we are going to defend the indefensible. We are not defending the indefensible, and this demonstrates our commitment to that very principle once again. And if you take the time to examine my track record as the chief of police, you'll see that I have time and again made clear statements and taken clear action where actions of our officers fail to meet the standards of this community. With that, I'm going to conclude and say thank you all.